When I first got to seminary, my classmates and I were told we needed a spiritual practice, or more than one, but it couldn't be zero. Spiritual practice was necessary, vital, crucial, non-negotiable. The problem was I wasn't sure if what I was already doing was good enough. What counts as a spiritual practice? Of course, different people will give you a different answer to this question, especially your youth. I started asking people about their spiritual practices, and I got wildly different answers. Some people meditate while sitting on a cushion, and others do it while walking in the woods. Some people make art or play music. Some people pray on their knees every morning, and it takes a minute or two, and others take 45 minutes at their morning prayers every day. After several years of collecting this anecdotal data, I had a general definition of what spiritual practice is. Spiritual practice is an activity that we often do alone, but not necessarily. An activity that connects us, a person, personally, to that which is greater than ourselves in a meaningful or profound way. That which is greater is also one of those wildly diverse definitions. It could be God, it could be a spirit, a higher power, the source, great oneness. But the difference between religious and spiritual is one of those sticking points that we talk about in seminary too. If this here Sunday worship is like a party, then my personal spiritual practice is a coffee date. Spiritual practice is an investment in a relationship, the way each one of us relates individually and checks in with that which is greater. This could be a formal, structured, traditional practice or many small moments throughout the day. For example, in the past, if I didn't drink the glass of water by my bedside during the night, I would just down it in the morning on the way to the kitchen. Now, when I drink that first glass of water in the morning, I stand still and I pay attention to the feeling of the cold water going down my throat. And I picture in my mind the countless rivers and streams that flow down the mountains and hills. In that tiny moment every morning, I remember that all water is connected and that my body is a piece of the earth. Bite-sized pieces of spiritual practice, like my first glass of water in the morning, got me started. And eventually, I decided I needed a more formal, structured practice in my routine. It was important to me that whatever practice I found was related to my ethnic and religious background, my ancestry, so as to avoid any misappropriation. With a little bit of research, I found something that fit, a tradition from the Celtic Isles that uses prayer beads that predate the Catholic Rosary. Unlike Sadie's 4 prayer beads, which each have a different prayer, I have 150, and you say the same prayer every time. I thought I would have to get good at it before I felt any benefits, but it turns out that I got results immediately, and not the results that I expected. It was through being bad at it. My impatience, my distracted thoughts, the questions whether or not I even believed the things that were in these prayers, what even is God, like all of this stuff. It was the stumbling, the practice that changed my life. A big claim, I know, but it's true. And when I asked other people about their spiritual practices, I tried to ask them what they got out of it. Like, why bother? It's something that you're bad at or it's difficult to make time for. And I learned that a peaceful heart, a calm mind, a connected spirit are the common results of these practices, but not in an end product sort of way. Mastery is not the goal. Practice does not make perfect. The magic is in the doing. A professional musician told me once, practice doesn't even make better. practice makes permanent. If you play the wrong notes over and over, your fingers will remember the wrong notes. That which we do over and over, we build into our lives. By practicing calming the mind, or engaging our creativity, or strengthening our spiritual connectedness in the safety of a regular spiritual practice, we become able to access that calm, that creativity, and that connectedness when circumstances are less than ideal. So many people say they lean on or lean into their spiritual practices when times get tough, and credit those personal rituals for getting them through. They told us in seminary, you can't draw water from a dry well. Like a good night's sleep or a good meal replenishes the body, I wonder what replenishes your soul. What fills your well?
I personally came across the spiritual practice of Lectio Divina, also called divine reading, while I attended the UU Church in Arlington, Massachusetts. It is a traditional Christian practice, especially common among the Benedictine order, that aims at developing a close personal relationship to the scripture at hand by providing the opportunity to think deeply about the text and respond thoughtfully to it. While traditionally using Bible passages at the UU Church in Arlington, we applied the spiritual practice also to excerpts of the Book of Rumi or scriptures of other world religions. And this is how it worked. We met once a week for an hour on Zoom. It was COVID times. And Reverend Flanagan gave us an idea of how the chosen scripture fitted into the larger historical picture. And then she read the text for the first time. The first reading is called Lectio, read. And it was to get to know the text. And afterwards, everyone said out loud one word that stood out to them. The text was then read a second time, called meditatio, reflect. And this time we focused on an emotion that the text evoked in us. And again, everybody, or those who felt compelled to, shared their emotion in one word. After a third reading, called oratio, respond, it was time to connect the word that stood out and the emotion it evoked and respond to the read passage. Reverend Flanagan also often asked us to include what the calling of the text is for us. This can take on many forms. If practicing Lectio Divina alone, you can write in your journal to capture your thoughts. You can write a poem, draw a picture, anything. In the group setting, those who wanted to share showed how this passage relates to their life, to current events, to experiences they made, really anything that came into one's mind. Lectio Divina is a personal spiritual practice, and therefore it was not advised to comment on what other people in the group had said. So there was not a back and forth conversations. However, I truly love finding out how other people interpreted the text, how it related to their life, what criticism or what praise they had about the passage, and what valuable lessons they took from the text. You really got to know your fellow church members so well, getting an insight into their life and into their minds. At the very end, there was a final reading, followed by a few minutes of silent contemplation. We sat in silence, yet in community with each other, and let our minds wander.
So as Erin shared, there is this really immense pressure when you start seminary to get yourself a spiritual practice. I experienced it too. I reacted slightly differently, as we all do. But what they told me was that a minister with a regular spiritual practice will be grounded, less likely to burn out, and overall better at their job. So it follows that if you don't have one, that you're going to be overwhelmed, burned out, and bad at your job, right? So they're pretty important. And I didn't have one. And so I like to do what people tell me to do, but I also don't like people that tell me to do things. So I had a dual reaction here. I dutifully tried all the ones that were assigned to me, because in seminary you get graded on this sort of thing. I tried yoga, I tried centering prayer, I tried all the kinds of meditation, I tried journaling, and nothing clicked. Nothing felt like me. And in fact, because someone was telling me to do it, I kind of felt like, I don't like this whole spiritual practice thing. It all just felt like this spiritual performance that I was putting on for someone. And so, of course, I started to wonder if I wasn't spiritual enough to be a minister. But here's the thing. Spiritual practice is so much bigger than the little box we try to put it in, right? One of our goals here at UU Nashua is that we are a community where we develop meaningful spiritual practices that connect us to wonder. That's one of the things we've written down as a goal we have. And every year in the board's year-end survey, who's ever taken that? Few of you? Just board members? So every year we ask you all about your spiritual practices, and every year a good portion of you answer that you don't have a spiritual practice. So I'm going to say, I am not here today to tell you you have to go out and get one, because then you're just going to resent it, right? Like me. Some of you all don't like it when people tell you what to do. But I do want to suggest, gently, that if you think you don't have a spiritual practice, that maybe you are wrong. We've all got practices, right? Maybe it's just that you haven't identified your practices yet as spiritual, or even as practices. That was my error back in those seminary days. I kept trying to create something new, to take on someone else's practice, to add something to my already full life. And of course it failed, because that wasn't what I needed. In the meantime, when I started seminary, I was 2 years in to taking weekly ballet classes. I had started when I was in one of the lowest points of my life, and it had been my steady lifeline in a couple of rough post-college, pre-seminary years. But ballet wasn't on the list of practices, right? And also, I had to go be with other people to do it. That's what made it meaningful to me. And they tell you you're supposed to be alone for spiritual practices, right? So I want to tell you, you don't have to be alone for spiritual practices. So I didn't even consider it. It didn't seem like it fit. Now I am 17 years into practicing ballet, and I'm much more cognizant of what it does for me. I know that it gets me out of my overactive brain and into my body. I know that it helps me have a better relationship with my body, with what it can and can't do. I know it helps me focus, that in fact, my brain cannot wander in the midst of a class if I'm going to have any chance of remembering the combination that the teacher has set. I also know that it gives me an hour and a half when I don't have to make a single decision. Each move is choreographed and planned. I make so many decisions in a day, and it is refreshing to let that go for a moment, to let go of my desire, my love of control, and to just follow someone else's directions instead. I also know what it's not about. I'm never going to be a professional dancer. I am far too old for that by now. I'm never going to be particularly good at ballet. I'm not flexible enough to create those really elegant lines, right? And that's not what I'm going for anyway. I'm not practicing ballet to accomplish anything or to become perfect. I'm practicing for the sake of practicing. I'm practicing because I know that I am a better human after a ballet class than I am before. Now, one of the things I also know about the days to come is that we're going to need these practices that help us be better humans, right? We are going to need to stay connected to wonder, to our deepest selves, to our most central values, to our communities of care. And to do that, it's going to help if we have figured out the practices that keep us connected, that bring us back over and over again to wonder, connection, community, and love. So I want to invite you to think about that for a moment. What is something that you already do that keeps you grounded? What connects you to your values? What reminds you about the wonder of this world? What helps you remember that you are not alone? We've given you a few examples of practices that work for us. What is it that works for you? Now, one of the resources that I have found to be really helpful in thinking outside the box about spiritual practice is this tree. It's still a list, right, which is imperfect, but it's a more expansive list than a lot of the lists you see. On it, you will see some of the practices you may expect, but there is also so much more than that. So I wonder, take a look at it for a moment. Do you see any of the practices that you just thought about here? And if not, do you see a category that what you were thinking about might fit into? Stillness, generative, creative, activist, relational, movement, ritual, or cyclical? Or does it all remind you of something else that you are already doing that you hadn't thought about yet? Like any list, it is incomplete, but it helps get me thinking, and I hope it gets you thinking too. My invitation in the coming days is to identify for yourself, what are your practices? What do you do regularly, doesn't have to be daily, that keeps you grounded and connected? What might you be able to reframe as a spiritual practice? And if your mind is still blank, remember this. Here you are, right, on a Sunday morning, gathering with others to sing, to reflect, to explore what matters. You are doing a spiritual practice right in this moment. So if you think you don't have one, here you are, right? Showing up here on Sundays counts too. You can put that in that toolbox that we talked about last week. If you were here last week, we talked about our spiritual toolboxes. So I want you to gather up all those practices you've thought about, stash them away in your spiritual toolbox so that you have them at the ready. Because we're going to need all the spiritual resources at our disposal to move through the days and months and years to come. May you find them, hold on to them, and use them when you need them.